that's our presentation.
Okay, we have time for questions.
Why not?
Susan Delacorte, go ahead.
Can you tell me, I haven't read this yet, but whether you do mention the National Securities Regulator and how this fits into that? Because we've seen that if that's sort of a symptom of what the same thing that you're describing.
We do mention it, although it's not a major focus of the paper. In a sense, the issue of National Securities Regulator is a subset of the larger issue. We're tackling the larger issue. We do actually have some mildly critical things to say about the federal government's approach to the single securities regulator. As you know, it's a voluntary scheme. In other words, provinces may opt in or not. We actually think that that's part of the problem, that many of the schemes to open up trade within Canada in fact end up balkanizing the country even more, and we think that the federal government has the ability to create a national economic space. It's been given a power under the Constitution, and it should exercise it for all Canadians. John, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the really fun parts of the paper is our assessment of the federal government's constitutional authority to act, and the courts have reviewed this, and they've come down very clearly on the grounds that the federal government can act. But one of the tests, and they've laid this out again and again, is this a scheme that would fail if some of the provinces didn't participate? And because the securities regulator is voluntary, it's not impossible that it will, and the government's referred this to the Supreme Court, it may not pass that test because it's too weak a measure. Yeah. Whereas what we're proposing, which is a vigorous measure in an area that's clearly federal jurisdiction, we are confident will survive judicial scrutiny precisely because it does involve all the provinces. So the securities regulator is done for the same kind of reasons as what we're talking about, because the same kind of obstacles exist to effective action without the federal government, but it's done too timidly. And we're saying, be bold. You have the authority, you have the moral and legal power to do this. Do it for all Canadians.
Can I just ask, it's tomorrow is the 20th anniversary of the death of Meech Lake. Do you think that had anything to do, that still has anything to do with the political climate that you're decrying right now?
Oh, I don't. As a former negotiator of the Meech Lake Accord and the Charlottetown Accord, I can state with some confidence that you know, the failure of 2 rounds of constitutional discussions is an important piece of the background here. That being said, these powers have existed in Ottawa since 1867. The barriers to Canadians' economic freedom have existed since 1867, and therefore it's not the full explanation. It's certainly part of it. Our view is that while Meech Lake and Charlottetown were in themselves traumatic events for Canada, that we cannot mortgage the entire future of Canada because of those things. We have to move on, and we have to make new decisions and move in new directions.
Perhaps, can I just add that the agreement on internal trade was a reaction to the failure, particularly of the Charlottetown Accord, and you know, 15 years later, it hasn't worked either, basically. So there really does need to be some kind of new approach, and it's right there staring us in the face, you know.
Yes.
Brian Lee, Media. Telling Canadians that you want to strike down the agreement on internal trade and give them economic freedom might leave them more scratching their heads than rushing to the barricades to fight for your cause. I don't think a lot of Canadians realize that this does impact them. So, you know, for those of us in Ottawa, we know about the annoyances, be it in construction, in accounting, so on and so forth, because we live at a provincial border. But if you are in the middle of a province, how does this impact your life? Can you give us some relevant examples of how this affects the everyday Canadian's life?
John, do you want to start?
Well, some of the stuff is kind of silly, like the rules about how big those coffee creamers can be, and obviously this isn't causing people huge inconvenience, that they're actually slightly different sizes. The fact that you're not allowed to order wine from one province when you're in another province is a little more of an obvious inconvenience, and it's also a bit of a head scratch. If you ask yourself, how many provinces in Canada are liable to develop robust wine industries and therefore even have producers benefit, it's a bit hard to follow. But The cumulative harm these do is twofold. One is that they add costs that you don't see, and that's a good way of sneaking up on people. But the other one is this pernicious sense that we're not really fellow citizens, that it is the job of the provinces to keep us from interacting with one another in our daily life. I mean, we vote once every couple of years, but we work and buy and sell all the time. This is part of who we are. And all these annoyances, that hairdressers have to have different certifications in different provinces. And I've never, again, been certain what it is about Saskatchewan hair that requires a special provincial treatment, and the prairie scissor that doesn't work in the Atlantic provinces. And so part of it, again, is the sense this is not how you run a serious country. Canadians have a right to have public policy that's not conspicuously ridiculous, as well as policy that doesn't just gratuitously impoverish us. And it is true that interprovincial trade barriers isn't a great start to a chant. But on the other hand, one of the things we're talking about here is why have the federal and provincial governments tripping over one another's feet where they don't need to? One of the things that led to trouble at Meech Lake and Charlottetown is this entangling of federal and provincial responsibilities. Sometimes you have to do it, and let's do it with the best will in the world and devote as much of the attention and energy of our governments to sorting those things out as we can. But why get into continual irritable hassles over stuff like this that doesn't make any sense? I don't think anybody in government looks forward to meetings on the agreement on internal trade at this point. And the idea that you should just be hampered, you want to move and start move your life to another province, get a job, and you find, there's these strange rules that say that bus breaks are different or certification for your trade is different. What kind of a setup is this? We're Canadians, and we ought to feel like Canadians. And in that sense, common citizenship and the liberty, the right to make a better life for ourselves and our family anywhere in our national home, that's what this is about.